Joining me now is former Florida Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy. She is also a former member of the January 6th Select Committee. Charles Coleman Jr., MSNBC legal analyst, civil rights attorney, and former Brooklyn prosecutor. And Douglas Brinkley, presidential historian and professor of history at Rice University. Thank you all very much for coming to the Sunday show. Douglas, let me start with you. Talk about this inflection point in history that we're in, especially on this day, the 58th anniversary of the signing into law of the Voting Rights Act.
Well, there's nothing more sacred in the United States than the right to vote. And one of the biggest moments in my lifetime is the Voting Rights Act. I would every year for decades go down to Selma, Alabama and march the Edmund Pettus Bridge as a way to educate and remind ourselves, renew ourselves that voting is the sacred right. And the fact of the matter is that Donald Trump really has broken that compact with the American people. The refusal to admit that it was a free and fair election is one thing, but to start creating a conspiracy to deny people their right to vote, to look for slates of fake electors, and to be the first president in U.S. history that didn't allow us to have a peaceful transfer of power is all reprehensible stuff, and it's all boiling into these indictments of Trump. And Georgia coming up is going to be just as damning and as inflammatory as what we've just had coming out of Washington, D.C.
Mm-hmm. Congresswoman Murphy, you were on the January 6th Select Committee. Your thoughts on Trump's indictment and his threat on his social media page, if you come after me, I'll come after you.
Well, I'm proud to say that the January 6th Select Committee laid out the broad conspiracy. I think it was the first time that we really unveiled that January 6th wasn't just a spontaneous riot that happened at the Capitol, but rather was the culmination of a multi-pronged approach to overturning the free and fair election, to stripping Americans of their right to vote and have that vote be reflected in the outcome of the presidential election. And so we laid that out broadly. The indictment mirrors much of what we put out in our report. In addition, they were able to get folks who didn't speak to our committee or who pled the fifth or privilege to share additional information. So I think they've gathered even more evidence about what happened. As to the threat, it's not a surprise. In fact, anybody who was on the Select Committee, who was a part of the impeachment regarding January 6th, had to have protective details because of the threats that were coming in. This is a reflection of how powerful people have control and have the ability to influence others to act on their behalf. We saw it culminate on January 6th, but you see it in small ways too, as people respond and back up these threats that the former president makes.
Charles, Donald Trump spoke in Alabama on Friday where he called out, quote, Marxist prosecutors for what he called racist in reverse law enforcement. What's your reaction to Trump trying to use the reverse racism card here?
Well, Jonathan, here you have a white man who has been steeped in privilege his entire life, a multimillionaire who has been the president of the United States, now playing the race card. I think that it is beyond rich for him to attempt that, especially at this moment, and play the role of someone who is being persecuted simply because he's being prosecuted. Ultimately, I am not surprised by this. This is very much so Donald Trump using a bullhorn to send out a full-throated signal to his entire base for the purposes of energizing them and galvanizing them. And at the end of the day, let's face it, also raising money. That is a huge part of this strategy in terms of what he is tapping into with regards to his base and what he knows they will respond to. So it is not a surprise. It is ultimately disgusting and inappropriate, but unfortunately, that is what has moved the needle for him thus far. And so I expect that these sorts of attacks on judges, on prosecutors, on everyone who is involved in this process are going to not only continue, but also to possibly intensify.
And, Douglas, Trump has gone after judges and prosecutors, but he's also going after witnesses. How unprecedented are these attacks on our legal system among former presidents?
Well, maybe about 20 years ago, the mafia in New York or Chicago might try to pull such stunts, but we've never seen somebody to act like such a bully boy, do intimidation, make threats. If you bust me, I'll bust you back. Worse, it's reprehensible. It's the sign of a unhinged dictatorial mind with a man with an authoritarian bent, determined to seek revenge on anybody who might be telling the truth, if that truth dents him in any way, shape, or form. So it's a horrific spectacle. And he's actually a citadel of bigotry, Donald Trump. I mean, ever since Obama wasn't born in America, straight on through Charlottesville, to the points of him not wanting to have a judge because they were Mexican American. There are 100,000. The Muslim ban he tried as president. This is a ex-president who really believes in white power, and that is his base, and that is what he builds his political party off of. And so it's just makes your stomach turn ill to think that this person was once sitting in the Resolute desk, the same place that FDR had to deal with creating the Manhattan Project with an executive order, where John F. Kennedy used an executive order to create the Peace Corps. We had Trump sitting there stewing in this kind of racial animosity aimed at dividing our country.
Yeah, I want to talk more about that in the next block, Douglas, because you raised excellent points in that answer. Congresswoman Murphy, among the charges that Special Counsel Jack Smith leveled against Donald Trump, incitement to insurrection isn't one of them. And that's one of the charges, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the January 6th Select Committee said he should be charged with. Are you disappointed that an insurrection charge isn't among those that Jack Smith has levied?
I have faith that Jack Smith has identified the charges for which he has the evidence to secure a guilty conviction. And I think that's really important. The federal prosecutors have a really good record. I think last year they were successful in over 90% of the cases that come before them. It's important that this prosecution be very tight, that what they put forward in the charges, they have the evidence to secure a guilty verdict. And so while he didn't put forward many of the recommendations that we had in our report, I trust his judgment on this. The other thing, though, I will say is that there are a lot of people, average Americans, who were lied to by this former president and acted on that lie. And many of them are serving time. They have been charged and convicted and are in prison for seditious conspiracy, for violence at the Capitol on January 6th. And so it's really important that at the highest levels, people are also held to account, because what kind of justice system do we have if the elite get away and the average Americans who are pawns in this game have to serve time?